Hi, welcome to the first in our series of Making Your Retirement Work for You, Creating Sustainable Retirement Income. Hi, my name's Sally Boyle. I'm the founder of S.J. Boyle Wealth Planning, a company that has worked with families and individuals for nearly 30 years, helping them plan for their retirement. So what do we mean by creating a sustainable retirement income? Well, some of the things that we're going to talk about today will help you understand exactly how you can do that for yourself. We're going to talk a little bit about the new retirement reality. We'll talk about the old rule I know you've heard about. Take 4% of your savings. That's the smart withdrawal strategy, but we're actually going to talk to you about smarter ones than that. And I know that you probably have heard that you have to be in the stock market, and you're saying, well, why do I have to do that when I retire? Because the market goes up and down, and I'm just not comfortable with the volatility. Well, we're going to talk about that using the very fancy term of managing your sequence of returns. What I think everything today, the new retirement reality requires, is that you have a more dynamic approach towards how you spend in retirement, a more thoughtful approach that takes into consideration all of the economic environment, and that allows you to build for a resilient or create a resilient income plan. We're going to walk through a couple of real world scenarios that make the point and close with some thoughts and next steps. So what is this new retirement reality? I think the one thing that we all have heard is that we're living longer, and that's not a surprise. You know, when the retirement age of 65 was established, we were living maybe 10 more years. Now we have to prepare for 30. And for my clients who are retiring in their 60s, they've got to plan for 40 years of retirement because we are now living into our 90s. We're doing that in an economic environment that has had a very low, we've had very low interest rates and a low yielding environment. And while that's great for people who are buying homes, it's not good for retirees who are trying to use their interest income to support their retirement income. So that's created a challenge for retirees and has forced them to invest into the market because people are not able to live on 1% and 2% yields. And so they, in order to get a reasonable real rate of return, and when we think about real rates of return, we're saying you've got to have a return that is in excess of inflation to keep pace with inflation, to have a real a shot at beating inflation. And so that's forced retirees to put more of their money into the stock market. Years ago, 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds was considered the normal retirement portfolio. Not anymore. We have seen and been in the position where we've had to put as much as 30 to 20% less in bonds. So we've seen portfolios that are maybe 70% in stocks, maybe even as high as 80% in stocks, with 30 to 20% in bonds. So it's a very new reality, new in investment reality in the market, and causes us to take on a little bit more risk in our portfolios. And so we have had these standard take 3 to 4% of your investments. That's your income, you know, put 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds, these kind of one size fits all rules that just don't apply anymore. People have to plan for themselves and take a very individualized approach as to how they're approaching their retirement income reality. Now, as I said before, the low interest rate environment has forced us to put more of our retirement assets into the stock market. And that means that we've had to deal with a more volatile market. We know that market corrections that are defined as something greater than 10% now happen pretty much every single year. And some greater than that. We've seen greater than 20% corrections in the last 5 years twice, right? So When we withdraw from our retirement assets, it matters. The timing matters very much, particularly if the market is down. If we need to take money out, or we need to take money out when our returns are negative. That really impacts the longevity of our funds. If we need to withdraw when the market is down, negative returns impacts our ability to withdraw, or certainly the length of time that our funds last for us. And the early years, the first few years of retirement are the most critical. The first 2 or 3 years are incredibly critical in terms of return and withdrawals. So we have to look beyond average returns. So often we're told, well, over the next 10 years or the last 10 years, your average return has been 7, 8, 9%. That doesn't matter. What matters most is the rates of return on your portfolio in the first 2 years that you retire. And so you have to give some consideration to protecting yourself against a market correction in the couple of years of your retirement. And through diversification strategies or cash buffers or even more dynamic withdrawals. And so some of the things that we suggest to mitigate the risk of a market correction in the early years of retirement are exactly that: to have a certain amount of cash, define what that might be, to have some bond ladders to protect you in the initial years of retirement, so that you don't have to draw down on that portion of your investments or that portion of your retirement portfolio that might be in the market, or to be flexible about your withdrawals. For example, just reducing your spending after a negative year or during a negative year if you're seeing that your portfolio is down because the market is down. And a third mitigation approach is to have a bucket or a time segmentation, have money investments that have better match the time of when you might need the money, and you allocate your investment assets based on those time horizons. So let's look at 2 different scenarios where we have retirees who have the identical starting portfolio, the identical income need, and even the identical average rate of return over the 30 years of their retirement. We're going to look first at old optimistic Alice. She was lucky. She retired at the end of 2024, and in 2025, she experienced a pretty good market. She had $1 million, as we said. She needed $50,000 per year. But in her first year, she experienced a 15% rate of return in the market. And so she had a gain of $150,000. Now, she only needed to withdraw 50. So at the end of that year, at the beginning of 2026, she had $1.1 million set aside. Again, more than she had originally invested. Now, we adjusted her needs by a 3% inflation rate, so she's going to withdraw $51.5 in 2026. But again, she's had a good year in the market, a 12% rate of return. So her $1.1 million garnered $132,000 gain. She withdrew 50 of it, but she had an extra 72,000 remaining. I'm sorry, 82,000 remaining. So the end of her portfolio in 2027 was $1,180,000. Now, she's had some negative years because, as we said, she had an average rate of return of 7% over the course of her retirement. But even with that, this substantial principal appreciation in the early years of her retirement resulted in her probably retiring even at a 7% rate of return, some negative rates of return during her retirement. But she retired probably with a portfolio of somewhere between $1.8 million and $2.2 million. So again, this is because she took out less in the initial years than her portfolio actually earned. And those early gains meant that she had larger principal left to expose to those gains. It created some resilience for her because she never got herself in a position where she was withdrawing against the principal value. And it's simply because she had a positive rate of return in the first few years. And those positive rates of return compounded over the remainder of her retirement. So she might even be able to increase her withdrawals based on her experience in the market. Now, we have a second poor challenged Bob. He wasn't quite so lucky. He started out with the same portfolio, $1 million. Same income needs, $50,000. But unfortunately, in that first year, he lost 15%. So there was a combination of things that happened. The market was down and he needed to withdraw. So he was withdrawing against a portfolio that was down. He was also unlucky in the second year, his portfolio experiencing $150,000 loss and a $50,000 withdrawal meant it just started the year at 800, but he lost another 80,000 and needed to withdraw another 50,000, 51.5 when we think about an inflation adjustment. So he starts the beginning of 2027 at $668,000. Now he does have some positive years after that, but the impact of the withdrawals and the negative exposure in the marketplace will have impacted his portfolio over the next 30 years in a way that he probably won't even be able to recover. And he might retire as something closer to a $300,000 value. And again, it's because we had a negative market and he needed to sell some of his investments when they were down in order to come up with his income needs. So he's selling low, and that complicates that further complicates the market correction because he does not have those principal dollars available in those first 2 years to come back when the market recovers. He's got $900,000 at best. And one of the things that we know is when your portfolio is down, you have to earn more than the losses, more than that 15% loss to recover and get back to your original principal value. So it's a big deal to have to withdraw when the market is down. And so he's in a much more precarious financial position than someone who retired into an increasing marketplace. So again, what we'd like to do, even though, our average rate of return is no longer applicable, what really matters to us when we retire is the sequence of return, particularly in the first couple of years of our retirement. So we might have exaggerated that example a little bit, having, just very generous rates of return for Alice, very negative rates of return for Bob. But I think it's really important to exemplify the impact of a negative market at a time where we need to withdraw. So there are strategies that can be used when we retire to help protect us against this. Lower initial withdrawal rates are one of them. One of the things that research has shown is that almost any portfolio will withstand a withdrawal rate that is somewhere between 3 and 4%. Research shows that. A 3 to 4% withdrawal rate will be sustainable in all market conditions. And so if that withdrawal rate satisfies your income needs, that might be an approach. But I think sometimes people want to enjoy their money a little bit more than that. So another approach is just to have a more flexible spending approach, to divide your expenses into those that are discretionary and non-discretionary, and just be certain that your retirement assets can support the non-negotiable ones, so that if the market does correct, you can maybe reduce your spending in those years. Now, one of the things that I use frequently with clients is more of a cash bucket strategy. And what that means is having some of your money in cash and some of your money in other investment assets that match when you might need those dollars. Uh, Lots of people use a 1 to 3 year approach to this. I use more of a 5-year approach. As an example, whatever clients need for the first 12 months, we will have in cash. But what they need from year 2 through 5, we will have in bonds, and maybe a series of bonds. My reason for using more of a 5-year approach is simply because we know that that's what happened in 2008, that it took us 4+ years for the market to fully recover. So we call it building a war chest. And I think that for me and for the way that I plan for clients, a 1 to 5-year cash bucket strategy is more comfortable. Now, there are those who approach their overall asset allocation, how much they have in stocks, how much they have in bonds, and they adjust their portfolio if they feel that market valuations are very high. They might go from having 70% in stocks, 30% in bonds, to having 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds. And this is an approach that can work. For me, it smells of market timing, trying to decide when the market is at its highest. And then once you do that, if you want to adjust back up again, to decide when is the time to buy in, which I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult to time. But there are people who do this. They take a more dynamic approach to their overall asset allocation. And then a final approach is to really enhance your guaranteed income streams. And what that means is we do have guaranteed income streams. For most of us, it's Social Security. For some of us, it's having a pension. And when you layer those guaranteed income streams on, you might decide that you want to take some of your retirement assets and add to them. And the typical thing that might do that is by buying an annuity. If we buy an annuity that provides us a guaranteed income stream for the rest of our life, that's another approach to layering that on top of whatever Social Security or pension income we might have. So enhancing a guaranteed income stream will also do that. And it does reduce the need to withdraw from your portfolio for your expenses. So the goal is really to align your spending with the reality, the economic reality of what's going on around you. And there might be 3 very dynamic frameworks that you can use. One is just a decisions rules approach, which is we're going to reduce our spending after a poor market year, and we'll increase our spending after a strong year. And this is a very simplistic approach. A more measured or structured approach would be using something called a guardrail strategy, where you actually look at your portfolio as it is today. You think about, well, if the market corrects 10 or 15%, what would that value be? And you compare your expenditures to that lower value to see what it is as a percentage of your portfolio. And you might make the decision that if you hit that lower guardrail, that you might adjust the spending, hit the lower guardrail in the market. And the same is true on the upside. You may make the decision that you can spend more in those years that the market is up. But again, you don't spend everything because you want to have some provisions to protect against the market correction that will be coming. And so there are very specific spending strategies that people use, saying once their inflation-adjusted income gets to be a certain percentage times their original one, they may adjust that spending down should the market correct. So it can feel complicated, but it can be very easy to do as well. Another spending approach would be just simply to smooth your spending, to take an average of 3 to 5 years. I think what has been shown to work best is to average the value of your portfolio over 5 years and then take a percentage of that. And what you're essentially doing is you're not making decisions in very high years in the market or very low years. So it takes the high volatility out of your portfolio value and smooths that volatility out over 3 to 5 years. And again, the third one is, as we said before, to match your spending floors with your upside potential. So it can mean that you absolutely have to figure out where the portfolio needs to be to cover your non-negotiable expenses. And that's where sometimes people fix their guaranteed income streams. They target that for the guaranteed income streams that they try to establish through their pensions, annuities, and Social Security. And then it gives them some comfort to be able to put the rest of their investment assets that are geared more for discretionary expenses, those they're comfortable exposing to some risk. So the best practices recommend dynamic withdrawal strategies that take into consideration the full economic environment that we all experience on a daily basis, market performance, inflation variability. We've seen inflation over the last 4 years much higher than the last 20. We take into consideration our personal spending needs and even how those change over retirement. We might spend more in years 70 to 80 than we do years 80 to 90. So taking into consideration those personal spending needs and how they might change over the years as well. We might spend more in our later years because of healthcare. And so that's where it's important to take into consideration the time horizon and how things might change over those time horizons. So a fixed withdrawal could be your approach. 3 to 4% of the portfolio we know works in a variety of market conditions. The income varies, but the sustainability is very high. Using a guardrail approach where we assume market volatility and our needs, and we establish the floor for our guardrail. And, if the market goes here, this is where our income generation needs to be, and to try to understand what we might adjust in our expenditure should the market correct and bring us to the lower part of our guardrail. And then again, using an income floor by using some guaranteed income sources, and then using only the market investments for your discretionary expenses. So again, the key to developing this strategy is just having a diversified investment mix, some in cash, some in bonds, some in annuities, some in stocks. To be certain that you're paying attention to your withdrawal strategies in any of your accounts, Roth versus traditional. Taxes need to be factored in because they are one of our highest expenses in retirement. And really taking a long-term view of it, making sure that we understand the impact that inflation will have on our expense needs, and to even look at those things that are probably growing faster than inflation, such as our healthcare costs or our long-term care costs. But what's most important is that we monitor it on an annual basis. Our income planning is not static. It's not simple. It is a living, breathing plan that changes in accordance with market conditions, our income needs, and the whole environment that we're developing this income plan. And so it should evolve, and it should evolve with you. So a checklist for a sustainable retirement income plan is understand where your income is coming from, income sources. Understand the tax nature of those income sources, and match those to your expenses. Divide them into non-negotiable and discretionary, and understand how your income sources will match with those different expense categories. Develop some contingencies for if the market corrects. What are you going to do? Are you going to spend less? And where is that spending less going to come from? And then adjust it annually. And we've seen the last couple of years, inflation has boosted most of our fixed non-discretionary expenses. So we have to adjust for these changes or the performance of our portfolio or our lifestyle changes. And again, we really do need to hedge for the longevity risk that we are all going to experience living until age, hopefully a golden old age of 90 or 95. So we face new challenges. The 4% rule no longer fits everyone. The sequence of returns is something that we need to be mindful of, and we need to protect against using different buffers and asset allocation strategies. Our spending is probably and can and will, whether we like it or not, evolve over time. And I think we need to plan for those, expect those, smooth the edges, and be prepared for those spending floors that are non-negotiable, and come up with a resilient plan that will operate best in all markets, all inflationary environments, all spending, and just incorporate whatever guaranteed income makes us most, comfortable, so that we can then adjust our investing to match the remainder of what we need. I hope this has been helpful for you, and understand if you've got any specific questions that you'd like to ask us, please just come to S.J. Boyle Wealth Planning. We have a contact page where you can submit any question that you would like for us to answer. We'd be more than happy to consult with you on a complimentary basis as well. So thanks very much for coming, and we really appreciate your time here. Thank you.